friends, it's Sarah from She's Crafty, She Knows It, and today I'm going to show you how to make these DIY sweater pumpkins. These are so cute, and you'll be using old sweaters, maybe sweaters that are too small, some sweaters that have holes in them, or sweaters from a thrift store somewhere like Goodwill, and we're going to upcycle those sweaters and turn them into these super cute sweater pumpkins. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so go ahead and grab some of your old sweaters or go to the thrift store, grab some old sweaters there. They're normally pretty cheap. I got several sweaters at Goodwill for just a couple dollars each, and we're going to be using the sleeve of the sweater. Okay, so we're going to kind of cut this sleeve into a tube shape. So you can see down here at the bottom, it's a little bit more narrow than the rest of the sleeve, and so we're going to kind of take that width and double it for the length. So say the bottom is like 4 or 5 inches, we would cut the sleeve about 8 to 10 inches long. You don't need to measure it with a ruler or anything, you can just kind of eyeball it. But we're going to go ahead and cut the sleeve to get that tube shape. Okay, so we can go ahead and move the rest of that sweater out of the way, and what we're going to do is turn this little tube shape inside out. And if it sheds a little bit while you're doing this, don't worry about that. It will not be shedding anymore once the pumpkin is finished. Okay, now we need to close up the bottom of the little tube. This is kind of where the cuff of the sleeve is, the part that's more narrow. And so my goal is to do as little sewing as possible. So I'm actually just going to use a piece of white yarn. You can use whatever kind of string, embroidery floss, anything like that, even a rubber band or something you could wrap around there just to kind of tie off the bottom of this tube. And I'm going to go ahead and double knot mine just so that I know it's really safe and secure. Okay, now you can go ahead and cut off the ends of the string or yarn or whatever you use to tie the bottom up. And let's go ahead and turn the little tube right side out again. So you can see the bottom now looks like this. It's closed and it's ready to be filled. Now if you had a larger pumpkin, you might want to put some kind of weighted items at the bottom of the pumpkin to keep it from kind of falling over and moving all over the place. So something like dried beans like this or rice. There's also these kind of pellets I found at Michael's that I really love. And so I'll link these in the description below this video. But I ended up using these little pellets that are made exactly for this to put in some of the larger pumpkins to kind of weigh them down. And so I know a lot of people use the rice and dried beans when they're making stuffed animals and dolls, and honestly I was just a little bit worried about it attracting insects or even rodents if I store the pumpkins in the attic, and so that's the reason I didn't use rice or dried beans. But if you've used those before, if you've made stuffed animals and didn't have problems, or maybe you did, please comment below and let me know your experience with using rice or dried beans or other items to weigh stuff down. But for now I'll be using these pellets just to play it safe. So if you want to use the pellets, you're going to put them in the tube first, and then you're going to stuff the rest of it with polyfill. And like I said, for the little tiny pumpkins, you probably don't need anything weighting it down at the bottom. For the bigger ones, I'd recommend it just so they're sturdier and they don't tip over and kind of wobble around. But stuff the tube real full with polyfill. So you don't want to understuff it because you want it to look really chunky and full. So stuff it as full as you can, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so here comes the sewing part. I've gone ahead and threaded my needle so you didn't have to watch me struggle with that. But go ahead and grab some embroidery floss. I'm using some embroidery floss that matches the color of my sweater material, but actually for this part it doesn't really matter. You're not going to see it, so it's not too important what color you're using. And you're just going to weave your needle in and out through the sweater material all the way around the tube. So I'm doing it maybe about 1/2 inch down from the top of that tube, but if you had too much fabric, say you cut the tube longer than you meant to, you could even come down 1 inch or 2 and cut off the extra fabric later. Just make sure you're going as straight as you can, about if you're going to do 1 inch down, go 1 inch down all the way around the tube, and you kind of want it to be equal as you go around. So just go ahead, keep sewing around the entire circle of the tube, and then we're going to pull it together once we get done with that. Okay, so now here's the important part. Now that we're tying a knot, you want to pull the threads together, but you don't want to pull them too tight. So ideally you would leave a little hole in the center of the pumpkin about the width of your finger so that we can stick those raw edges that are cut back inside the pumpkin. So I know that I'm tying the knot a little bit loose right here. I wish I had shown you and actually stuck my finger in the hole so that you could see that there was room there, but just make sure you leave a little bit of a hole enough to get your finger in so that you can stick those edges back inside the pumpkin. So once you're done tying the knot, go ahead, like I said, use your finger and stick the raw edge that's cut back inside the pumpkin. If for some reason you had like 1 inch or 2 left over after you tied the knot, go ahead and trim that off, maybe down to about 1/2 inch, and then stick those raw edges inside. Okay, you can go ahead and trim the ends of the embroidery floss if you haven't yet, and now we're going to go ahead and give this pumpkin some shape. So I'm going to go ahead and thread a much longer piece of embroidery floss. I don't have an exact measurement, but it does need to be plenty long. It will depend on how many times you're going to go around the pumpkin to give it shape, and it will depend on how big your pumpkin is to begin with. And ideally you do want this embroidery floss or thread to be a color that matches your sweater material. Okay, so once you have the needle threaded again, you can cut the embroidery floss and tie a couple knots in the end of the thread. Okay, so now we're going to start with the bottom of the pumpkin. You're going to kind of stick your thread through the sweater at the bottom of the pumpkin to make sure that the knot is actually going to catch on the knitting. You don't want the knot to just slip right through the knitting. And then you're going to kind of stick the needle through the bottom again and go all the way up through to the top of the pumpkin. So be careful with your fingers. Obviously, I didn't have any longer needles. This was the longest needle that I have. So just watch for your fingers when you're sticking the needle all the way up through the top. And make sure you don't poke your finger. You might have to kind of squish the pumpkin flatter so that you can kind of see it coming. And then grab the thread and pull it all the way through. Okay, now you're going to pull the thread really tight. And we're going to go ahead and stick it back from the bottom all the way up to the top again. And now when you pull it tight, it's going to kind of make a little bit of an indentation the same way that a pumpkin does. So you can kind of see it starting to take shape already. We're going to do this again. So go ahead and go around again, up through the bottom, and then come out the top and pull it tight. And we're going to keep doing the same thing. So I'm going to go all the way around the pumpkin doing this exact same thing. And so I ended up going around the pumpkin 6 times, pulling the threading tight like that to really give it a lot of little ridges and a lot of shape like a real pumpkin. Okay, and so once you're done giving the pumpkin its shape and it looks the way that you want it to look, you can go ahead and stick the needle through some of the knitting. You can even take the needle back down to the bottom of the pumpkin and tie it off in a knot so that you know the threading is going to hold really tight. Okay, so now that the pumpkin is done and it looks so cute, it is time to figure out the stem. So I went ahead and got a bunch of little branches and twigs from the backyard, and that way I can mess around with them and kind of see which one looks the cutest. So you could use like a really thick, kind of chunky stem. You could even take a bunch of little tiny twigs and make a stem out of a bunch together, use a skinnier one. I even had some cinnamon that I thought about maybe cutting off and using a stick of cinnamon instead. So there's just tons of options. So let's figure out which one looks the best. Okay, I think I found the winner. This one looks really cute. It's the size I was thinking of. It fits perfectly in the hole. It's in the center of the pumpkin. If it didn't fit in the hole, you could always cut it shorter and use some hot glue, but this just fits perfectly and I don't even need to glue it. So I think I'm going to take a little bit of twine and go ahead and just kind of wrap it around the stem and make a cute little bow. But of course, this part is totally up to you, whether or not you want to add a twine bow, some leaves, or leave it the way it is. Okay, friends, that's it. Look how cute our little pumpkin turned out. I love that we took an old worn out sweater that I got at a thrift store and turned it into an adorable little sweater pumpkin. And don't forget, I'll link the supplies like those weighted pellets in the description below this video. I just love the way these DIY sweater pumpkins turned out. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up and make sure you subscribe for more videos. Bye!